Hello, I'm Tiffany Parks, and this is A Bittersweet Moment with Katie Sewell.
Hello, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katie Sewell, and this is your midweek Bittersweet Moment. And today I am joined by Josh Sims. Josh has been working in the moving industry for over 20 years. He's packed and moved homes up and down the west coast of Australia, and he's been a leader in the moving industry in Singapore and Hong Kong. He's now the chief operating officer for Sanelo, a global move management company, and he's joining us today from Sydney, Australia. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
So, Josh, from reading your bio, you have a
hmm
big, deep industry experience with global relocation. So, we invited you on to share some tips today, but I wanted to start with you personally because you've
Yep.
also lived as an expat. So, you've
hmm
been an expat in multiple countries. Would you say that time abroad shaped your general approach to life? Did it change your perspective on things?
I think for me, like I always had this urge or this desire to live overseas, and I was just really fortunate that the job that I had allowed that. I remember having a conversation with the leaders at Santa Fe when I was still in Perth, Australia, telling them what I wanted to do, and they actively kind of encouraged it and got me on my way to Singapore when I was about 27, 28 years old. It was a great start to being an expat. Obviously, my journey's been really kind of like progressive in the fact that I left Australia as a young single guy and then returned home eventually after two other countries with a kid, a dog, and a wife.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been fun, so far. But obviously, it's still going, and hopefully, there's might be some more chances down the road to do it again.
So, did you meet the wife while you were living abroad?
Yeah, I did in Singapore. We were actually flatmates to start with.
Yeah.
Got on really well. I elected to move out because there was a little bit of tension in the house in the early stages. So I moved out, lived with some friends for a while, and we let the relationship happen kind of organically like that. And it's been great ever since. Yeah. So she works in finance industry. So when I moved to Hong Kong as well, it was an opportunity for me to move, but she was well supported by her bank, who transferred her employment but stayed in the same role once we moved up there as well.
Oh, wow. All right. So we invited you on to because you're so knowledgeable about moving abroad. And a lot of people who listen to this show are very interested in moving abroad
hmm
or even just moving to a different part of wherever it is they live currently. So, what things would you say that people should consider when they're planning for a big move abroad? And maybe we can separate it into two categories like an individual moving abroad and a family and a dog or something moving abroad.
Yeah. I suppose like whether it's either of those things, the planning is somewhat similar, but obviously there's a little bit more depth to planning once you put kids and pets into the picture. But it varies for so many people. Some people kind of do it effortlessly, and some people it's a really, really big life event. And I suppose when people are moving abroad, it's the reasons they're doing it do vary as well. So is it work? Is it a new opportunity, or have you been laid off? Are you moving home from a job that you love to be closer to family because of the family event? There's so many dynamics that are different, and they kind of affect the stress levels. But I suppose for me, like I won't go into that classic tip of like how to prepare for your move, like throw out everything, because I think they're like kind of obvious, and people will or will not, whether someone's going to go and throw everything out, they'll make that choice before they do. But I suppose like I'll try and look at some of the things where I see moves go better or relocations go better. For me, my biggest tip is always be as active and involved in the process as you can. Although you've contracted a move to someone like us at Sanelo to move you from one country to another, that's a very physical kind of process, right? We go through the quote, we look at your house, we go through the quote process, you agree, we come and pack your stuff, we load it into a ship, it goes on that ship, it arrives, and then it comes into your house. So that's very physical, but there is so many things attached to that process. And the removal or the moving process is just one cog in hundreds of things that are going to happen when you move. But it's also very, very important. And once you do it, you forget about it, and then you arrive, and then it's kind of on the water, and you forget, and then it's like, oh God, it's arriving soon, or I'm going to need this, or whatever. So it's like for me, be as actively involved in the process as you can. Really understand what's going to happen, what are the dates. So when you pack up all your stuff, you're homeless, right? How is that going to affect your costs when you're in the country before you leave? Are you getting hotels, Airbnb, staying with family? How long are you going to be without your items? What can you do without for 6 weeks? And then be prepared to be without them for longer. because delays at the moment, roughly 50% of the containers are arriving late. It was much worse about a year ago when it was, I think global levels got down to somewhere closer to 30%. So containers were always and regularly running late. So be prepared, for what the time scale is. Roughly, it's like somewhere between 8 to 12 weeks on average, but it can go out longer. And once it's on the water, we have very, very little control over what's happened, or what will happen. It's basically impossible to speed it up. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just be prepared for that. Yeah.
Curious, if a person is working with someone like your company, do they need to know where they're going in the country that they're moving to? Like, for instance, I mean specifically, like, do they need to have a house or a place, an apartment already? How does
No,
that
not at all.
work?
I'd say majority of our customers, unless they're moving home into their and back to their own home and they're repatriating, they rarely know the property that they're going into. That's not an issue. We just need the at minimum the country, because obviously there's guidelines and requirements and documents that they need to be able to import their goods. But once it's in the country, we can transport it to any city within there if they do change their mind. This is just obviously if it's not the original city it's quoted to, cost change and things like that. So you just need to be prepared. But no, you don't need to know the exact address yet at all.
I know you said that people should decide for themselves whether they want to liquidate all of their possessions or not before they move somewhere. But I mean, would you recommend that people say if they're moving abroad and they know that they're going to be gone for just a limited time, maybe 2 years, maybe it's a contract, for a certain job, and then you're coming home? Would you recommend that people relocate all of their possessions when they move?
It's
What's your
funny, like
advice?
our customers vary extremely, like, a lot, in their attachment to their items. I mean, everyone probably has at least 20 boxes, I would say, of stuff that they would want to take, and maybe a couple of furniture pieces that they're attached to. That's as a bare minimum, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
just, but the average person, yeah, has more than that. I think personally, yes, I would relocate it, majority of my goods, if it's for over a year, unless I'm going into a kind of furnished accommodation at destination and I know it's short term. The reason being is like I don't think people actually seriously add up how much they buy once they arrive in a new country. And you do it gradually over a 1 or 2 or 3 year period of ever how long you're there. But I've walked out of IKEA in Hong Kong when I first moved there and spent $1,000. Didn't even think about it, right? Because I was
Right.
like, I need that in my house. I need that in my house. I need that in my house. And I think because we do a lot of that incrementally, we don't really know what we're going to do. And then everything you buy, are you going to just send it back again once you're finished? Is that going to go back to your old home? What have you done with your items in the country that you left? Because you're probably going to, if you're attached to them, you want to keep them, you're going to have to pay to store them. So is that cost of storage over the 2 or 3 years going to equal the amount that you're going to send it as well? And I think there's a nice thing about having familiarity with the items in your house, especially when you have kids. They are attached to things like my son can all of a sudden want a toy that he hasn't played with for 6 months that's in the cupboard and it'll just pop into his head. And if you don't have it, it's the end of the world. So, we have access to them. So I think, there is an importance to it. And our things are our things. And overall, like they do help you settle, they do help you relocate and kind of be and adjust quicker.
Since you're a moving expert, I'm just curious, is there maybe you'd have to imagine in your mind two different places, but is there a major difference between moving to one location in the world versus like another location?
Not so much in process. Some countries have really kind of like strict processes, like say moving to Indonesia or the Philippines, some of those Southeast Asian countries. But moving into like Hong Kong or Singapore, it's pretty easy to do the documents and all that kind of stuff. I'd say there's a bigger adjustment moving. I can obviously talk to this moving from Hong Kong and Singapore myself. So being there, we as a family, we had a domestic helper, right? Now that was a fantastic way to kind of like live and bring up our kid because life back in Australia is very busy. So we have to do all our cooking, all our cleaning. And I'm not complaining because I know that's a normal part of life and I enjoy it, or I enjoy the cooking part. But you can think when you have someone in your home helping you raise your kids, you come home from work and all those kind of like domestic duties are done. So you get a lot more quality time with your kids rather than having to cook and clean while they're watching TV or playing or whatever it might be. You get to be able to really switch off from work and from life and spend more quality time. So that was I didn't realize how much I valued that until we came back to Australia, where it's just much, much more busier because you're doing it yourself. So I think like even though people might think there's a large adjustment of moving to places like Hong Kong or Singapore, life is, it's very, very work orientated as well. So that's why these things exist. it does. There is ways to help you along like that, and it was a pretty big adjustment for us coming back to Australia after so long out.
A lot of people think of moving as being that thing that they dread. They want to be in the new country or they want to be in the new
Yeah.
city, but the moving is that's just like, oh, the moving process. I'm curious what it was about it, or maybe even just how helping people make such a big life change that actually made you want to have this as your career.
Oh, I'll be like just to kind of address the moving conundrum. I'll be honest, it sucks, right? Like moving,
Yeah.
like is not the actual physical part of it is not great. Like I like the first part, the excitement about going to a new country, the preparations, like where am I going to live? Like I'm kind of like I quite actively engage with change and I'm always looking forward to that. But I hate the settling in part, like the unpacking, the monotony of like putting where stuff's going to go and like trying to figure out like how all that works because that takes really long. Like the moving out part is easy, right? Like it's quite quick. The guys come through, they pack it all up, it's really exciting. And then you get there and you've got to figure out where everything goes. And actually settling in is a lot of hard work because you have to figure out not just where all this stuff's going to go, but all the other things like getting your bank account, you're settling kids into school, your daily routines, and all that kind of stuff. And that takes a lot of the time. Like I think people underestimate the impact of daily routine on their lives and the shake-up that can have. Everyone adjusts, kids adjust, and pets adjust. So it's relatively straightforward. But yeah, moving for me, like that part is the hardest, settling in.
What attracted you as far as a profession goes?
Oh, it's hard to say. I fell into it because my dad did it. When I first started in the industry, it was a summer. So I would work in it during school. My first job was working in the warehouse, taking the tape off the boxes. Then I graduated to working in the warehouse, like ticking things in and out and that kind of stuff. And then the next summer I went onto the trucks and just did the moves all around Perth and things like that. Then the next summer I kind of graduated to doing the long hauls. I never drove the big trucks that we have. So in Australia, our trucks can go up to 43 times 40-foot containers long.
Oh,
So,
okay.
120 feet plus the size of the prime mover. So that's, 150 odd feet, maybe a little bit, maybe longer of steel running up and down the highway. So that was really cool. So we would go on trips for 3 weeks, not come back. And I kind of love the adventure of that. Like we would sleep under containers. You get a daily allowance of like, say, $50 to get a hotel room. It's not much, but it's what you get.
Hmm.
So if I don't spend that money and I sleep in the truck or I sleep in the container somewhere on my mattress, and that's $50 in my pocket. So when you're a student, that's like quite a lot of money. So I kind of really love that adventure. I am very attracted to the kind of personal relationship and individual nature of the job. So like I really did enjoy like working with a lot of our customers.
Do you find that people, when it comes to the idea of putting all of their things onto a ship and sending it somewhere, do people get nervous about that?
Some do, some don't. I'd say probably less so, but obviously we do in our industry we offer protection for that. So if you do ever have a worst case scenario where your goods fall off a ship, as long as you purchase the protection, you'll be covered. But if you don't, there's quite a lot of risks that go along with that. So like the shipping company the salvage company can actually charge you to pull things out of the water if you don't have protection. And, that's a risk that people don't often know, but is explained. It does happen very rarely. But, we had a customer in Australia once who moved from the east to the west. And on the way to the west, the train derailed and all of his goods were written off. And that would probably happen once a year. When he relocated back to the east, the same thing happened. So, that's exactly what protection is out there for. And it's one of those things that can happen and people do protect themselves against that risk. But it is rare. And you'll get the occasional customer that's really, really nervous. But majority is kind of like once it's out of their house, they kind of don't worry about it. We have some pretty cool functionality now where we partner with a tech platform to be able to chart the ship's progress as it leaves from one country, and you can watch it on the map as it goes. So that's pretty cool and gives you a little bit of security, can show you which way it's going to head in the next few days. So that's nice.
I do have a slightly impossible question, maybe, but I was reading a bit of the history of Sanelo, and I noticed that it's a part of Santa Fe relocation, which
Yeah.
comes from a company, Anderson and Company Shipping, which began in Bangkok in 1897. I mean, just from your expertise, what would you say is the biggest difference between relocating internationally now versus when the company would have started over 100 years ago?
Yeah, probably like just the contents of people's things,
Oh, that's interesting.
is really different. Obviously, shipping electronics and things like that bring in new complications because it can be sensitive to heat or to movement. So that's another risk. Furniture is not as well made these days. It's not necessarily so like, maybe in the 1800s people weren't shipping furniture, but let's say like kind of like from before mass production started and like companies like IKEA, furniture was much, much more sturdy and could move around in a container like they do. But now the classic IKEA stuff, it can ship as it is, but it's going to be loose when it arrives. And if you dismantle it, putting it back together is really hard. I always tell all the customers, IKEA is difficult once it's been dismantled, and generally you don't have the instructions. Someone else has taken it apart at the origin, and then some guy in wherever you're going in France who's been allocated to make your delivery that day is going to have to put together a three-door IKEA wardrobe with a mirror with no instructions. It's just impossible. That kind of furniture has changed how people move, but it's also kind of like one of the reasons we've seen volumes decrease over time on average because of the throwaway nature of some of these items. People aren't as attached to it and are prepared to buy again.
Okay, so let's say you have to leave us with just another piece or another couple pieces of advice. What would you advise somebody who's considering an international move?
It's hard to not to go past what I was talking about before. Be actively involved, plan as best as you can, and then also be prepared for delays because it does happen. You need to be ready if that happens to kind of like adjust with you and your family. Work with your moving coordinators. We call them relocation experts at Sanelo. They'll keep you updated as it progresses, but they don't know the dynamics of everything else. They don't know everything else that's happening in your life. They don't know when you're going to sign your lease. There's no point signing a lease until your goods are there. So you have to really be actively involved in what's happening because it's just like I was saying before, it's just one cog of many for someone's relocation, but it's an important one.
Josh Sims is the Chief Operating Officer for Sanelo, a moving relocation company. If you wanted to learn more, you can visit sanelo.com. And of course, we'll put a link in the show notes. Josh, thanks so much for joining me today.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. And until next time, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katie Sewell. Talk to you next week. Bye.
You could sponsor this show and reach educated, curious, and compassionate listeners all over the world. Visit thebittersweetlife.net and click support to get the conversation started.